It's a race to the bottom. Were the releases in 2023 really better than 2025? How's it, everybody? Celtic Link here. We are back for another Dokkan Battle video. In today's video, we have a special little topic I wanted to talk about today. A lot of people have been talking about how this year's releases have been somewhat subpar, going as far as to say that, you know, years like 2023 and the infamous dreadful Fusion Zamos meta were actually better than the releases that in this year of 2025, given the amount of power creep we've seen and the relative stages that we've gotten. After all, we do know that this year in 2025, many of the stages were designed around the anniversary units of Gogeta and Vegito, much in the same way all anniversary stages tend to be designed around the anniversary characters. So in this video, we're going to set out to answer the question, well, who was better? Which year had the worse or better releases? Now, the way we're going to do this is we're going to go through each release starting from New Year's, and we're going to classify them as better or worse. Now, this will be relative to the content that they released in. So, for example, or right by what was by the end of their celebration. So, for example, 8th anniversary, we would be judging them relative to like Red Zone Broly and the Sen Shenron events, or you know, worldwide that year, right? The Sen Shenron event, the Omega Shenron event, and Dismal Future Red Zone. Where's it at? I think I got rid of it here, but yeah, and the Dismal Future Red Zone. And then for like 10th anniversary, for example, we would be judging based on, you know, these Red Zones here, Festival, and Battle Card and Formidable Foes, right? The content that they all released in. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and let's jump on in, starting with the New Year's units. I decided to start with this even though the New Year's units technically released the year prior, their celebration and the main usage of them occurs within the year provided, so I figured this would be a good place to start. So with 2023, we of course have the Orange Piccolo and the Beast Gohan, right? The controversial man himself, and arguably #1 unit for a year straight, released. Compare that with Glorio and Daima Goku, who are actually quite good in their own right. And Glorio, there was a legitimate argument for him to #1 as the year began, just because of how good he was doing and that crazy amount of support he gives. So given their release to the content that they released in, however, right, these two released at the tail end of the last meta, and were immediately shifted away from that as we entered the 10th anniversary. These guys, their events pretty much kept running, especially on global, until the 8th anniversary in July. So they actually had a better reign than these guys who were cut immediately short by the next anniversary. So if I'm being honest, right, I would probably put Piccolo as the better release than Daima Goku and Glorio. And unfortunately, this also means putting Gohan there too, since they released together. Of course, Gohan having his issues notwithstanding, right? We're not going to pretend like they weren't there, but as a release, this release fared significantly better. It also lasted a bit longer than this release relative to the content that would continue to release throughout the year. And I know that's crazy to think about, right? But that's kind of how far we've moved in 2025. But for both of them, and relative to the content that they released in, Piccolo and Gohan were significantly more dominant, especially Piccolo. So that brings us to the anniversary characters, the 9th and the 10th anniversary. So let's start with the Dokkan Fest characters, right? So the Z duos, right? So the Z duos both released with the first standby mechanic, basically forcing us to play this event here and use our spirit bombs against the Sen Shenron, who was pretty tough. But if you use the spirit bomb, it was a pretty easy event. So much so that we almost overlooked this event until people started trying to jump in here with teams outside of the spirit bombs. Like that's legitimately how it went down. Like if it wasn't for a few people calling out guys like Truth and me, I'm like, look, hey, you need to go back and check this stage out without the anniversary LRs, because it's actually kind of tough. We probably wouldn't have even been talking about this stage. Like that's crazy to think about. But relative to the release of that stage, because we didn't really get any red zones during 8th anniversary, right? So we pretty much still had the red zone Brolys, the metal coolers to contend with, and the Cell Max stage 1. These guys were a pretty good release for that stage. But then compare that to, of course, the Dokkan Fest Gogeta and the Dokkan Fest Gogeta and Vegito. Honestly, I mean, the entire game, like we're talking about with Vegito, a unit so good that they had to literally triple bosses' HPs here by the end of it, just to accommodate for the amount of damage that Vegeta was doing, or you would literally finish the fight way too quickly, right? Like we even got a 3-hour-long event dedicated entirely to him as a character. Of course, he did have some challenge like stages like this, but for the most part, he dominated all content that he came out with. And I would say the impact is significantly more than what the 8th anniversary was providing. So, I would say that the 10th anniversary actually had the better releases. I think that probably goes without saying, but you know, I think we actually have to put it out here and say it out loud. Just so people can really understand where we're at with this. So that brings us to the carnivals, right? All right, now this is going to be a little weird because, of course, there are 4 carnivals in 2025 and only 2 in 2023. So with the carnivals, right? Relative to the release of the content, right, still factoring in Red Zone Broly, the Sen Shenron event, and Cell Max, compared to Super Saiyan 3, Goku, SSB, Vegeta, Gohan, and Frieza, relative to their content here, Jiren, and well, actually both Jirens, they're both Jirens, right? Goku, Vegeta, Jiren, both Jirens, Festival of Battles, and Battle Hardened Formidable Foes, right? This is interesting because honestly, I think Kai Goku and Kid Gohan were the better release relatively, and that's mostly because, right, like while this guy you could probably put up here, the other 3 relative to all 3 forms of content really struggled, and that brings the whole group down. I mean, I guess I could just do them individually and put them here, but I did double up the releases for those that released at the same time here. So I mean, I guess I kind of got to do it this way, right? So carnival to carnival, these guys, relatively speaking, I think were better releases compared to the content than all of these guys combined, right? While Kai Goku was significantly better than Kid Gohan, and this guy is significantly better than the 3, right? I would say that the gap is less wide between Goku and Gohan than there is between him and the rest of them, right? Like Blue Evolution just, I mean, let's be real, he struggled in all of these content. Didn't matter if it was short with Battle Hardened Formidable Foes, he was going to struggle in Festival, he struggled here, He struggled here, right? Because the additional normals like really hurt him, even when he was fully built up. Gohan really shined here in the Battle Harder and Formidable Foes. That was kind of his. But then where he really started to fall short was in these two stages here. He just couldn't keep up in damage with the rest of his team, and which really brought him down. Not to say he was bad, but it definitely wasn't his fight. And then Goku, Frieza, right? They have their own issues, right? And while they could do well in these two fights, honestly, I would say they do much better in Festival of Battles, which is crazy to think about, than they did in the two Jiren fights. Like, it just crazy to think about. But so overall, as a release, I would say that the gap between these two is significantly less than the gap between them, and so that would make them, to me, the better release. Moving on to the immediate release, the March release following the anniversary. This one's pretty much a no-brainer, right? If we were going to compare releases to content, right, the 17 and 17 are significantly worse than Daima Vegeta. People love to hate on Daima Vegeta, but relative to the content that they released in, Daima Vegeta was doing a significantly better job in his role in those fights than 17 and 17 did, who barely even had a functioning team. You couldn't even really keep their passive up for the most part, which was to have a full extreme rotation, because half your team was super class characters and one of them was the GT duo. So Daima Vegeta was in a significantly better spot. So that brings us to the Saiyan Day unit, right? And if we're comparing units here, the releases, and I hate to say this, like this hurts inside to say this, but compared to a release, right, compared to the content that he released in, God Goku is actually the better release than Kid Goku, and I love Kid Goku. Kid Goku is amazing across all content he released in, but God Goku did his job significantly well, and he also had a significantly better team to work with than Kid Goku does, right? Not that Kid Goku has a bad team, but God Goku's team was better, right? Being pure and hybrid Saiyans was just such a good leader skill. Granted, Earthbred Fighters is essentially that, right? This did give him access to more things like Joint Forces Pure Saiyans cards, like the Spirit Bomb duos, and other releases. He also helped out Fizz Gohan a lot, actually. They were a good combo on a team here. But you also, like, if we consider, I didn't really use this in my factor, but when we consider really, hype factor outside of the content they're released in, right? Like, Dokkan put a lot more effort into hyping up God Goku than Kid Goku, who had almost no social media representation, whereas God Goku, like, they did a live reveal, they did, teasers, they did all this kind of stuff, and then for Goku, they just did nothing. So relative to the content that they release in, I do think God Goku is in a significantly better position than Kid Goku, though, right? He was just so good, right? And I think what made him more dominant is, like, he was one of the few dodge characters who you could take into Broly, who canceled dodge, and he would just rock it. Like, that's how good he was. God Goku is definitely the better release. So moving on past Saiyan Day, right, the April Fool's Dokkan Fest, we have Kale versus Cell. Now this is a tough one, and this is kind of why I decided to call this the race to the bottom, because relatively speaking, in both of their content, these were both terrible releases. And I like Cell, I do. I like KO. I love running Universe 6. But wow. Just wow. But honestly, I do have to give this one to Cell, right? If we're truly comparing this one, I have to give it to Cell, right? At least Cell had a functioning team, right? He had a super easy A that could work with him. And while he did struggle with the Jiren fights, he at least could work here in Battle of Hard and Formidable Foes and would get better later on. Kale, however, that was not true for. Kale did not get better later on. In fact, Kale did not get help until 2 years later when she was no longer usable. And then she herself, while crazy powerful, right? She was crazy powerful. Like some of the highest attack stats we had seen for TUR at that point. She was just so difficult to run. Half her team couldn't be run in the major fights, and that really caused her to struggle. And especially since she needed to have that cauliflow with her, and there was just no workable cauliflow other than the EZA LR, who themselves did really struggle, even in the Sen Shenron event, which would have been the best thing for them because it's a bit longer and they could stack up just a bit. It was still a struggle, right? So I do have to give the release to Cell, which is crazy to think about. But the part 2, I mean, this one's a little bit easier relative to the content. Super Boo just had no place. So he, I would say, is definitely worse than Pycon, who Pycon actually significantly helped Cell's team and did a great job on his own as well. He dominated, throwing out 80 to 100 million attack stats depending on how your setup was, easily being able to take on Jiren, both of the Jiren fights, and also being good in short fights like Battle Hardened Formidable Foes, where, I mean, you might be able to get him to transform in the final turn, but, I mean, for the most part, even in his base form, he was doing well in that content. So I have to give the release to Pycon for the part 2, which brings us to the Golden Week. I don't even think I need to argue this, and I'm not even gonna try, but I mean, I think it goes without saying that 2023's did actually have a better Golden Week release, and that's crazy to think about because Hit was actually quite good, right? Hit was actually really good at the time of this release, but Kaioken Goku just dragged. The gap between Hit and Kaioken Goku is so much higher than the gap, but well, actually I wouldn't even argue that there's a gap between these two. Both of these dudes were dominant. Goku, right, being able to revive, right, and have basically be invincible once he revives, and access to, right, the GT duo, having the access to them to at least have like a counter revive to proc his passive, made him such a good unit. That and Ki Blast counters, which at the time weren't that prevalent, but would play a role later on in his run. And then Piccolo Jr. just being a dominant force in all forms of content released around him, and even moving into the rest of the year as well. So I have to give the release of Golden Week to that year as well. For the Part 2 LRs, now this is a little interesting because the Part 2 LR this year was a Carnival LR, not a yellow coin like it was in previous years, like in 2023. But relative to the content and future content that would come, I mean, once again, I don't really think there is much of an argument for anyone else other than putting Bulma ahead of Kale and Cauliflower, right? Bulma, there was an argument for her the entire year next to Orange Piccolo as the #1 unit, whereas that is just significantly not true for Kale and Cauliflower, who, I mean, while great, while fun, have the help that Universe 6 needs and can do well in all forms of content released in. I think the only one they really struggled with is obviously Festival of Battles, and I guess you could say they struggle a little bit in Battle Hardened Formidable Foes, just a little too short for them, but you're not going to see Kale in that fight. It's pretty much just Cauliflower, and I guess they struggled a little bit in the Blue Goku fight as well, just because he canceled dodge, but there were workarounds. But Bulma herself, being the support type unit that she is and doing all the things that she was doing, plus being pretty much invincible, made her the better release. Which brings us to the the June Dokkan Fest, right? So for 2023, that is Turles, and for 2025, that is Mercenary Tao. Again, relative to the content release, Turles is definitely the better, the worst release, right? no question asked. Tao is still a dominant force in all forms of content that is currently available, even now, versus Turles, who was barely even good in the content he did release in, which was pretty much just the Sen event, which, I mean, he could do okay in, but, I mean, you couldn't even activate half of his passive, right, because there were no Goku enemies, right, so, given that alone, I would say that makes him a worse release than the, Tao, who actually had Goku enemies you could activate his passive with. Okay, and then the Part 2 LRs, come on, guys. This shouldn't even be a question, right? Triku, right, was the Part 2 LR for Turles, and he is definitely a worse release than the Tien, who is good, and there was an argument for him, right, is when we're talking yellow coins, right, there was an argument for him to be up there in the top 5 of yellow coins, including easy A's, right? In fact, up until GDC, there was an argument for him in the top 10 of LRs, so pretty good there, all right? So, now this is an interesting one, right? So we're going to have to jump around a little bit here because, you know, the Tanabata releases, because technically the next release should be the GDC and Worldwide, but Tanabata used to be before, and I think it's important to do this one first, as it released on JP first, so I think that's, you know, because that's kind of relative, but I guess these guys also released at a different time, so, you know, we'll see. So for Goku compared to Golden Frieza and Gogeta, if we're talking impact, this is a tough one, right, because I do think Goku was really good relative to the content he released, and he dominated this fight. Even Cell Max to a degree. But Frieza, however, right, is really good in the special battle, which he released around. Really good in this. Really good. Not really good, but is usable here. Can easily take down these fights, even though they do cancel dodge towards the end. I guess if I had to say, this is tough. This is actually a tough one, comparing Frieza and Goku, or Frieza and Gogeta to Super Saiyan 4 Goku relative to their release, because I do think Goku was more impactful to the Sen and, I guess, the Omega Shenron event, which would released by the end of his celebration. But Golden Frieza and Gogeta were pretty dominant in the content that they do release in, but again, not as impactful, right? They were just another unit that could do the content, whereas Goku, like, he became almost a must run for Omega, one of the few units who could competitively fight against it. So this is a tough one. I would say it's pretty close, actually, between these two. I know people don't like that. People have a hard-on for hating Goku, but I think it's pretty close. But I guess just because of the amount of content that Frieza and Gogeta can be used on and the versatility, I guess they would probably be the better release overall. But that isn't to say that Super Saiyan 4 Goku is a bad release, right? In fact, that's not to say that any of these are necessarily bad releases, just that, you know, they're compared to the release that we're comparing them to, one was in a better standing. Okay, and this is actually, you know, for the Part 2, I actually think Broly goes over here as the better release as well compared to Omega, because Omega, while good, did not have a team to work with, right? Omega could be used in the fights here against you know, at the time that he released, pretty much only Omega Shinron was pretty much the only place he could be used. The longer fights of Broly and the Metal Cooler were okay for him, but still really, really difficult. Just because, right, a lot of what he does relies on GT bosses, right, through his passive, as well as relying on debuffs, which not many fights allowed him to do at that time. So I think that makes Broly the better release, even though Broly's kind of a one-trick pony for Festival of Battles. So that brings us to the this is actually a tough one. Because we didn't have this. So I guess by default that puts him in the better category. There is no equivalent DFE TUR for Trunks because they canceled the August TUR, which would have been the equivalent for that. And they upgraded him to an... Well, I guess they didn't. They upgraded him to an LR, huh? Oh, that's tough. You're going to make me put him in the worst category, aren't you? Yeah, I guess so, right? If we were to compare releases, right, like this LR, Gohan, Goten, and Trunks should be the August DFE, but they were upgraded to an LR, which would be Trunks. So, yeah, okay, they are the better release significantly. Not to say that I hate my boy Trunks, but LR speaking wise, or content speaking wise, the LR is significantly better and much easier to use than Trunks was on release. Although Trunks did get better in the immediate celebration, I would say, yeah, Gohan, Goten, and Trunks are the better release. Which brings us to Worldwide, ergo GDC. Relative to the content that they released in. So by the end of this, let's say by the end of the celebration, so by the end of GDC, right, we have the Special Battle 2025 and the Hybrid Saiyans Supreme Magnificent Battle, and then of course by the end of Worldwide 2023, we have the Divine Wrath and Mortal Will and the Dismal Future Red Zone. Impact wise, I'm definitely gonna have to give it to GDC 2025. These guys were significantly more impactful as a release, right? Not only did they dominate, each LR in its own right dominates Special Battle. Even if some of the stage they struggle in, they all bring something to each of the stages that makes them clearable for their teams. The same cannot be said true for the releases during Worldwide 2023, right? Like if we're comparing the releases here, right, in order to compete in Dismal Future Red Zone, which is basically the main thing you looked at for them, you were all for the Blues, it was all essentially running the same team, right? And you could get away with beating Fusion Zamos without them, right? Although they did make it easier, the same cannot be said for these guys. I would almost argue that it is basic outside of running like a niche setup under Tau or one of the anniversary units with items in mind, of course, right? You were likely not going to be having an easy time beating this without one of the GDC LRs, which again is not true for the Dismal Future LRs. And then of course the part 2s as well would go in there, right? So GDC 2025 had significantly better releases, right? Okay, and that brings us to the post GDC, post Worldwide release. So in 2023, that is the 17 and 18 and the Baby for 2025. All right, and that should be pretty obvious. I would say that the Baby is the significantly better release than these guys. These guys not only did not have a team, they needed a Goku, they needed reps of Universe 7 or Universal Survival Saga, which was just not in a good place at the time that they released. And, right, they were getting dominated by the Dismal Future, which was the major fight. Even the Omega Shenron fight, because of the second phase of this fight, had a pretty significant AoE, right, for the time. 400k is what it was doing. That AoE could really decimate them because all of their defense was post super, even their damage reduction. So unfortunately, they were just not a good release relative to their release. Whereas Baby, on the other hand, is great in Special Battle, right, because of his unique tech. Works in Battle-Hardened Formidable Foes for the same reason. Works in Special Festival of Battles, and I mean, not that most people are really doing these fights, but he's also really good here too. So relative to the release of the content, Baby is the better release. And this also goes for the Part 2 LRs as well. Baby's Part 2 LRs, well, actually, no, I would give it to Baby's Part 2 LR, because at least they have a team to work on, and I think they do a lot better in the relative content than Ribrianne did versus Omega, and Ribrianne did versus the Dismal Future, right? Ribrianne's sort of major draw to the content is Ribrianne's major draw to the content was like kind of utilizing them to juice up the Spirit Bomb for the Z Duo. That was kind of her claim to fame, and her giant form did help out a lot with Fusion Zamas. But as a release, the Part 2, these guys pretty more impactful. They help Baby's team out more than these guys help out the androids. So yeah, I gotta give it to the Super Saiyans, right? I know a lot of people don't like them, but I think they play significantly better than Ribrianne does. Okay, so of course, right, the year is not over yet. There's 3 more releases not accounted for: the November release and the December releases. So for these 3, I mean, I'll just go based relative on the content and where I would put them. But relative to the content, these guys were actually not that great of a release. They really struggled in the content there were some shenanigans you could pull in Omega Shenron, but Dismal Future was really a bad struggle for them. So this goes for Android 21 as well. Although Android 21 did see some good usage, well, both of these actually saw some good usage running into 9th anniversary on Beast Gohan's team or on the Artificial Life Form build up team. Transformation boost, like, she could work a little bit on Broly's team too. So there's that. As a release, I would put these guys in the good category. These guys are a good release. The Super Saiyan Trio, they made everybody feel better about the Dismal Future Red Zone because they dominated it so hard. So this is where we're at, right? If we look comparatively, it's pretty even actually comparative releases, right? Like the New Year's units, right? 2023 has it, but then Anniversary Part 1 or the Anniversary Dokkan Fests, right? 10th anniversary has it, but then 2023 has it here, but then 2025 comes back for the March. But then 2023 comes back, right? So it's honestly pretty even. I would actually say up until Tau, right? It's pretty even split, and then everything after that, it's pretty clear that the 2025 releases of that era, that portion of the year, that stretch of the year, are significantly better than their 2023 counterparts relative to the content of the race. So honestly, yeah. It's pretty close. It's not that bad. And I think that's a fair... the main reason I wanted to do this was so people can actually see, relatively speaking, that every year has its peaks, it has its ups, and it has its downs. And, right, to sit there and be like, oh, well, it was so much better. Well, the reality is it's not. Some were, some weren't, and it really just depends on how you're utilizing the characters, what events you're taking them in, and how you're playing. But they're honestly, like, as a release, significantly, and this isn't even factoring like how much money each of these characters made, because I'm sure if we did that, the list probably, honestly, actually looking at this, the the list probably wouldn't change that much, right? Like, these guys made significantly more money than the Diamond guys, right? 10th anniversary made more money than the 8th anniversary, right? Like, so actually, I would be willing. I haven't checked. I'd be curious to see how 2023 performed monetarily worldwide compared to the GDC. I feel like GDC did better, but I could be wrong. But the main reason I did this, right, was so people say, you know, people are calling 2025 a dead year, and there's certainly been some missteps. But in terms of releases, it's pretty much on par with every other year. We can see there's a pretty even spread between the years, so it's honestly not that bad. So, guys, that is it for the video. If you like the video, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you have not already. And in the comments down below, let us know, right? Is there anybody on this list you would shift? Are there any arguments you would make for putting one of the 2025 or 2023 units in the better or worse category? Let us know your thoughts and your changes you would make in the comments down below. Again, this is just my list, my opinion, but I'm curious to hear what you guys think in the comments down below. Otherwise, guys, as always, thanks for watching, and aloha.